If you're just interested in hearing how DID and Plurality relates to being a furry, in my experience, skip to the timestamp on the screen right now. But just know that there is a lot of context required to have a slightly better understanding of the disorder and the umbrella that encompasses Plurality as a whole. Also, before we actually get into the video, I just want to say, yeah, it's another I've Become Rambling video. I've still been working on the Ask Ivy video, and it has been a ton of work. I like this editing style that I've been going for lately. It's been a lot of fun for me, and I think that it's very whimsical and silly. It takes a lot of work to actually edit these videos, so I hope that you're all excited for it and what's coming up. First off, I just want to say that I am in fact actually diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. It is a form of plurality that is recognized by the DSM. What it boils down to is that if you are in childhood and you go through some severe trauma, it can be a couple of big traumatic events, or it can be like a lot of trauma over time. Your brain doesn't actually develop the ability to combine all of the different personality aspects into one. As a result, you end up being sort of a split individual where that can have different streams of consciousness and ways of interacting and thinking with the world. And this is a gross oversimplification of it, but in short, what it means is that I never learned how to be a single person in my brain. In my brain, there are still different parts of it that want to behave in different ways to solve different types of problems. Now, although I do live with the disorder, I am not an expert. I'm not a medical expert of any kind, and this is a very loose ramble that is meant to shed some light on it because I get asked a lot about this. But remember, this is not a substitute for medical advice. If you suspect that you may have a disorder, you should speak to a medical professional, not to a YouTuber in the comment section. Smile emoji. Now, one big thing about DID that I also want to make clear before I talk about how my life as a furry content creator plays into it, not everyone that suffers from DID or OSDD or DDNOS or has some other form of plurality functions in the same way. Most people that you meet that are plural are going to be functionally different people. And that might seem obvious, but I'm talking in pretty much every way. I have several friends who are also plural systems, and none of them are similar to each other in the sense that if you put them all in a room and you asked a stranger to talk with them without telling them anything that was going on, they wouldn't be able to really tell the parallels between these individuals. There are things that a lot of DID and OSCD systems experience that are parallel to each other, but those are aspects of the disorder and not the disorder as a whole. Basically, take my experience with a grain of salt as not being representative of everyone that has DID or OSCD, because that is just simply not the truth, and it manifests so differently for different people that it is not a good idea to imply one experience to all of it. But hopefully I can still teach you something new and interesting. Now, there are a couple of words that I'll be using while I'm talking about stuff that you should also know. One of them, of course, is DID, which, as explained before, is dissociative identity disorder. Another is plural, which is referring to any person that doesn't have a single identity that they latch onto at its core. So anyone who is plural will have two or more separate identities. People used to call them personalities, multiple personality disorder, which is now an outdated moniker. System is referring to when a person, a human person, has more than one part in their brain that they are comprised out of. Typically, it is in reference specifically to DID and OSCD, but I've also seen it used for others. And last but not least is alters or headmates, and those are the different parts of the brain. Those are the guys that exist up in this skull, up in here. The thing that was really fascinating for me, in hindsight, is that for a really long time, I actually wasn't aware of the fact that I had this disorder, which is actually quite a common thread. Most people that have DID don't actually get a diagnosis till later in life, and there are tons of people who likely have it that will never actually end up getting a diagnosis, because the way that this disorder works for the majority of people that have it is in a very covert manner. There is sort of a stereotype that you see among a lot of shows that depict DID. For one thing, a lot of media still calls it multiple personality disorder, which is wrong. And there are a lot of media that portray it as this thing that is extremely obvious and with very specific archetypes, and the reality is that it's just not that simple and often not how it works. In our experience, most of my headmates are individuals that function in a way that is fairly similar to me, but we have different preferences and sometimes different moral compasses, not to an insane degree, but what'll end up happening is prior to our diagnosis, A good example would be, I would be playing a game with my friends, and I'd be having a great time, and then midway through the game, I would suddenly just have a very big change of pace, and I wouldn't be having any fun anymore, and I would want to do something completely different. That is a symptom of more than one disorder. So coming to the conclusion that that could have been DID is not obvious to pretty much anybody. You would think ADHD comes to mind first. But this kind of thing would happen frequently, and it would even happen with things like eating food, because not all of us have the same food preferences. And sometimes we'd be in the middle of a task, and we'd have to kind of catch ourselves and be like, what were we doing again? What's happening? Oh, right. And then we pick up and everything is fine. There are all these little bits that are disconnected from each other in our day-to-day life, and for the most part, we just simply will pick up where we left off and keep on going. Blackout amnesia is not something that has happened to us super often. It has happened a small handful of times, but for the most part, the notion that every system has nothing but like blackout amnesia between alters and no memory is a myth. There are systems that do operate that way, where certain alters or even all alters can have no connection to each other beyond having to write in, say, journals or whatnot, but that's not super common, and that's because that kind of thing doesn't actually really help the brain. And so most of the time, in my experience and a lot of my friends' experiences, DID and OSCD are disorders where you have selective amnesia that you don't choose yourself, but it's not total blackout amnesia like some people make it out to be. Anyhow, when I was discovering all of this, one of the things that actually kind of triggered further investigation for us was Finn, who is one of my headmates. Right now I'm Quill. This is Quill speaking. Finn really got attached to one of our characters, a little Zorua that Six had made for us. And the thing is that Finn was this like tiny little guy, and Finn, the alter, grew really attached to this character. But for some reason, at the time, Finn had this kind of attachment to the character in a way that they couldn't really describe accurately. He was very kind of almost panicked about it, because he was like, this character is me. Like, when I look at this, I see myself. But there are times when I look at it and it's not me. And in hindsight, those times were actually when other people were in front in the headspace looking at the character, being like, that's a cute character. That's a really cute character that we have. But that's not really us. But when Finn was around, he quickly noticed that when he was feeling really strong attachment to this character, he felt a certain way. He didn't feel the same as how our brain felt at other times. And so after several weeks of ruminating on this, and having had these kinds of feelings before several times in life, Finn just decided to openly talk about it and asked people to refer to him as Finn if he had it like in his bio, or if he was actively saying it, because he just wanted to test something out. And sometimes people called us Finn after that. It didn't really hit for us, but when he was around, it really did, because it made him feel seen. He was tired of just feeling like he was a part and wasn't being recognized as an individual person. Not every single person that has the disorder feels this way about it, but for Finn, it was such a strong feeling, he really needed to get that out of his, well, I would say system, but out of his brain. And this eventually led to more parts of our brain realizing that they wanted the same things, and us sort of trying to talk to each other. One really strange thing that's manifested throughout time, just living in our lives, was that we would sometimes have thoughts that weren't actually like our own thoughts, and we would always think, oh, that's weird, why am I thinking that? Instead of going, wait, could this possibly be a different little thing in the brain? Oh, that's crazy, that's insane, even. And to be fair, I think that if you've lived your whole life not aware of this kind of disorder and not knowing how it functions, to suddenly be thinking more about it and being like, huh, that's weird, there might be something wrong with me. It's not something that's going to really occur to you in the moment. But overall, what has ended up happening over time is a lot of my headmates actually have sonas that they use to ground themselves and be like, that's what I look like in our head. And we actually use these in our brain to organize things. And I have documents that I use to communicate sometimes, because we're not always super great at communicating with each other. But overall, there was a direct tie for me to my characters and my headmates to their characters. And I know that this is not a solo experience for me. Some of my friends who are systems are also furries, and they do similar things where they have actual OCs for each of their different headmates that they use to represent themselves both in their own head and when talking to other people. And I think that there's something really beautiful about that, because it sort of allows you to represent yourself in a way that matters. Inside of my brain, I look like this. This is how I actually look. That's not meant to be like a, oh yeah, this is how I want to look. In my head, that's how I am. If Finn is in front, he looks like this. And that's the beauty of it, is that it is a way that we organize ourselves in our brain. So there's a fundamental tie between being a furry and coping with this mental health disorder that I've lived my whole life with. And I think that there's something really, really beautiful about that, and it's genuinely part of why I have such a strong attachment to the furry fandom. Now, the final thing that I kind of want to talk about is just some of the struggle aspects of it, because a lot of the time when I'm in a bad mood, I'm not going to be recording a video or streaming. So a lot of the time people come to my streams and I'll be talking about my disorders or just about life in general, and they'll be like, wow, this person seems really happy and like there's nothing wrong with them. But I want to take a second to remind people that on social media, you're going to be seeing people at their best. I don't really publicize myself at my worst, because that wouldn't really be super entertaining for most people, at least not in my audience, because my audience likes good vibes, not the YouTuber panicking mode. Screaming! Because of that, sometimes there has been pushback when I've talked about it, because people are expecting the disorder to make me miserable at all times and make life unlivable, when again, I have several friends with Plurality, and that's just simply not the case. Most of the time, people who have DID are just normal people like the rest of us. A lot of people with DID are able to mask all the time in a way where most people cannot tell the difference between any alters fronting while they're masking. And so as a result of that, like, genuinely, you have probably interacted with several people, if not many people, throughout your entire life with DID and had no idea, because the disorder exists in a covert manner. Even now, I look back at some of my clips and I can sort of see who would have been in front at a given time, but it's still not super obvious, because when we're streaming, we're usually masking to some degree. Even right now, I'm talking in a way that's much more like, hey guys, I'm a YouTuber. But in short, like, just given the fact that I have autism and several other disorders on top of DID, it's just something that is comorbid and a very important part of my life. So whenever people also come to me and are like, oh my god, Ivycomb, like, you know, you're making this DID thing your whole personality, and it's like, that's because it fundamentally is. And I think that there's a weird disconnect there for certain people, because they think that it's like a thing that you do by choice, when it's more that like, I don't have a choice. This is how my brain formed going into my teenage years and into adulthood. I never asked for this to be the case, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to be miserable about it and let it dictate my life and prevent me from achieving good goals and cool things in life. Basically, there's a lot of hidden complexity to this disorder that is not often talked about, and I hope that I've been able to spread a little bit of intrigue to all of you guys, and that you've liked this video. If you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to do a follow-up video answering your questions as part of my Ask Ivy series. So you know what to do, guys. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and then go to the merch store and check out my Patreon if you so choose to desire to do so. Do like, more like, yes.